All right, welcome back to episode 5 of the Daily Edge. We are hitting our stride, and today we are going to kind of focus back on fitness. We're going to talk about gadgets and gamification and wearables and applications and all the different things that we use. Obviously, when you do something every day, which all of us have for this year, things can get stale, right? We've talked about community being a big part of that, but there's so many other cool things out there that people have developed, and we thought it would be a good idea to share some of the stuff that we're using and how it's impacting us. And TJ is going to be the expert in this area. He is our gadget, our guy that spends a lot of time researching things, and we buy a lot of the stuff that he recommends. So why don't you kick us off and pick a place to start? I don't know which area you'd like to start in, but I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. I think a cool area to start is, let's start, because we're in the middle of winter, let's start around running indoors. So one of the things, we're surrounded by people. I actually have a couple of really good friends. One of my best friends has a, 10-year no treadmill streak. And for a lot of people, that's, they may be daunted if they're around someone like that who runs outside all the time. And we talked a little bit earlier about not being an early person, and I've always looked at it like I need at least one or two things to be at my favor if I'm going to get up in the morning. It has to, like in the summer, at least it's warm out. If it's pitch black and it's 4:30 in the morning, at least it's warm, right? In the winter, there has to be something there for me. So normally, it's freezing cold, but at least, I'm starting at 7 a.m. when the sun's about to come up or something like that. But for a lot of people, that's just not something they enjoy. So it's important to find your ultimate treadmill setup. And I see, we mentioned in the first episode, the application Strava, and we can jump in and dive into Strava a little bit later in depth. But one thing Strava allows you to do is kind of share your reaction to the activity you just completed. And more often than not, when somebody has to run on a treadmill, you see a throw-up sign next to it. Oh, tread 4 miles. It got so bad for me that I was going online and I found a guy by the name of Yassine Abdallah. If you don't know who Yassine Abdallah is, he just finished 3rd or 4th in the nation in Division I cross country. And I was so stressed that I wasn't getting, everybody had such a negative connotation towards treadmills that I thought me doing my work on a treadmill was hindering my fitness. And I went and searched and I found this video on YouTube, and it was a video of him training on a treadmill saying, hey, you can get the same effect running on a treadmill that you can. And then you've started to see that you can running outside, and you've started to see that most elite athletes in the world, Jakob Ingebrigtsen is the name that comes to mind. He is probably without a doubt the most gifted endurance runner in the world at this point in time, and he spends a ton of his time on a treadmill. But so many people get so bored so quickly. They get pulled into just staring at the numbers on the display. People used to get by that by throwing a towel over the top of it. Now there are so many other ways that you can configure your treadmill experience to really cater towards what you enjoy doing. So,
does that have is the type of treadmill, or are they using a treadmill because they're trying to be easier on their bodies? Like, talk about both those.
Sure. So I think there are two pieces to the puzzle with that. I think for them, the two things are convenience. He's in Norway, so it gets cold, and it's super convenient to be on a treadmill. It is easier on your body. And with the training approach that a lot of people have, it's an effort you can control. Now, will the inside pace and effort match the outside pace and effort? Maybe not always. 6 minutes. For some people, I have a good friend on her treadmill. She feels that her efforts on her treadmill are harder than outside. I think not the treadmill that I have now, but the one you had prior to that, you felt like the treadmill efforts were harder than they were outside. So that may not always translate equally, but it is going to be easier on your legs because you're not pounding on. And most treadmills nowadays curate their surface in a way that it is a little bit more flexible, some more than others. If you've ever been to, again, in Orange Theory Fitness, we talked about this at the beginning. You want to talk about a flexible deck. Like those are extraordinarily flexible. Most home treadmills aren't that flexible, but they do provide those advantages. So controlled effort, easier on the joints, and convenience. Those are three big ones. But back to curating your experience on your treadmill and what you enjoy doing. If you're somebody who likes to do a lot of their easy mileage on a treadmill, set up a TV. And now, some people can't do that. They feel like watching a TV show, they're too far into whatever zone of endurance they're into to really enjoy what they're watching. It almost seems like you're fighting a battle. What I found worked for me was I subscribed to a service back in the day. I've since curated this off of YouTube, but back in the day called Quello, and it was live concerts. I could watch concerts all day long. It's mindless, but you watch your favorite band up there and you're getting the excitement you get while out on a run outdoors, listening to that on your headphones. Well, now you're watching it. And then over time, have added some other components to that. We can talk about some of those later, like Zwift and some of the other testing elements, but really spending time being intentional and curating your experience so that it is enjoyable can really help you get through this time of year, that late December, January, February timeframe, if you do it the right way.
So if you have somebody that just doesn't like to run on a treadmill or wants an experience of being outside, when you look at treadmills, so asking for advice here, I don't know how many you've tried and different things. And Todd, maybe you jump in. I know you have the Peloton Tread Plus. Talk to me about the type of treadmill and what type of services or things you should look for in a treadmill.
I think to start with me, and then we can pass it to Todd. If you're on a budget, there are treadmills out there that are less than $1,000. Horizon is a company. I'm actually on Horizon 7.4 AT, I think, right now, which is a little more expensive, but I also run 100K a week. And in this time of year, 3 of those or 4 of those runs, so 30 to 40 miles a week, are inside on my treadmill. So I need something that's a little bit more resilient. But I spent, a decade running on a treadmill from like Sears, which doesn't even exist anymore for all intents and purposes. It was a ProForm treadmill that I bought for $500 back in the day for Christmas in 2012, I think. And that worked for me for, again, really close to a decade. So you buy a $400, $500, $600, $800 treadmill. Zwift is something I mentioned earlier that absolutely gamifies it. So Zwift is a virtual platform that was originally developed for cycling, but you can use, it works on Apple TV. So you can set a TV up in front of your treadmill. And again, go buy a TV at your local Walmart for $200 for a 55-inch flat screen and whatever. Get an Apple TV. It works on an iPad. If you just want to set an iPad on the display, you can do it on your phone. But essentially what it does is, whether it be the treadmill itself and the ones that I just mentioned, the Horizon ones, connected directly to Zwift through Bluetooth, or you can get a foot pod, or you can use, there's a couple other methods we can talk about later, but they connect to Zwift, and it loads you into a virtual environment, and you can watch your avatar running on different courses across the world. There's a course that Zwift has curated called Watopia, which is not a real place, but you can see other runners and you can try to pursue them, and you can see all your stats visualized. What's my pace? What's my heart rate? What's my cadence if you have a foot pod connected? So it's much more immersive. Now, it's not an environment that's photorealistic, but it's definitely more engaging, and especially since they've added things like they have a track now that you can run on. And that's cool, because that Zwift is again, if you're a runner in Zwift, you're in the minority. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people use it for cycling. For running, not a ton of people. But when you jump on the track, even if there's 5 people, there's still something to chase. Even if somebody's running 10-minute miles, you can make it your goal to lap them a number of times during an interval. But that's another thing. So a cheap treadmill setup, like, you get a TV down there, you implement Zwift, or you implement music videos, or you implement watching, like that right there, figuring that out over a couple of weeks, that's a great entry level. And then you can talk about kind of the next step up.
Yeah, I would just say from a treadmill perspective, it does certainly matter what you're looking to do with it. So a lot of people might be looking to do walk runs or incline walks or that sort of thing. And I think, as TJ said, there are plenty of very affordable treadmills out there. Now, if you're getting into intervals, still a lot of very affordable treadmills. Now, depending on what kind of speed you're running those intervals at and how often you're doing, like if you're running those intervals north of 10 miles per hour and or you're going to be putting on some heavier hills, inclines, some treadmills have incline limitations. So I think the first question is, what are you looking for it to do? And that is a big factor in terms of what you might want to invest in. Certain treadmills have Bluetooth connectivity if you do want to connect it to headphones or certain experiences and things. I would say for me, I do have the Peloton, and the Peloton instructors in those classes are super engaging. And they mix it up, and there's different classes. You can join live classes. I generally do most of mine on demand, like after the fact, just recorded classes. It keeps track of what ranking you are either at that time or all time that's completed that class. So it's kind of fun. Can you get in the top X% of all the runners who have done this? Again, gamification. Admittedly, probably feeding the ego a little bit. Take what you can get. I would say, I would say that's huge for me. Even if you don't want to watch TV, I've got a playlist on Amazon Music that when I'm doing a hard workout, it's kind of like a marathon playlist sort of thing where I've got to dial myself up and need some of that external motivation or energy. I will put that on, kind of like watching a concert in a sense. That's a big lever for me. I will say if I'm doing easy runs, that's where I can do audiobooks or podcasts or even have a conversation or things. So depending on what you're doing, I think there's different things that work better than others. Again, easy workouts where I'm not expending a lot of energy or whatever. I have a little more mental capacity to engage in the content. And then I will say, we've talked about this in one of the earlier episodes, but some of the boutique fitness going into a place like an Orange Theory Fitness and being a part of a community, that in and of itself is motivating, energizing, and they do a great job of gamification. So one of the things they do at Orange Theory is they track where your heart rate is. You've got a green zone. Well, you've got a gray and a blue zone, which are kind of your warm-up zones. You've got a green zone, which is your base zone. Then you've got a yellow zone, which is your push zone, and then a red zone, which is kind of your all-out zone. So they track your points in each of these zones, and so you're competing with yourself to try and get a number of points. And I was looking, it's fun to look back at the all-time statistics or even, your statistics for the year, things, how many, they call them splat points that you've gotten. And even just in the class, kind of seeing how hard you're working. It's a measure of accountability. There are some days where you feel really good and you can push it. And there are others where you feel like you're exerting a lot of energy, but you're still in the green and you push yourself a little bit because you know what your heart rate's capable of. So I would say those are some of the primary levers that I've used. But to go back to the treadmill, and I would say for Peloton, you don't have to have a Peloton treadmill to participate in the Peloton classes. You can do that on any treadmill with an iPad. I believe there is a subscription that's associated with that. And depending on how many times a week you're doing it, may or may not be worth it. And maybe there's someone else in the household that you can share a subscription with sometimes. Just to alleviate cost purposes. But those are some of the ways I get through the winter. I'm one who hates running out in the cold. I absolutely hate it. So I do a lot of my work indoors for sure.
I think that to wrap up the treadmill discussion, I think there's a couple more. You mentioned some really important elements as it relates to the different types of treadmills. So, if you're somebody who's looking to explore a lot of incline work, Nordic Track makes some phenomenal high-end work or high elevation capable treadmills where you can get, I think, north of 20, 25, 30% incline. So if you're somebody who likes to hike and likes to climb, Nordic Track is a good solution there. And then I think, from an upper end, Wahoo has just released a treadmill that is phenomenal. And you want to talk about something that is very akin to an outdoor experience. So one of the things that treadmills over the years have not evolved on is the engineering around their motors. So if you wanted a treadmill to go faster, typically your max on most treadmills is going to be 12 miles an hour. But if you wanted it to go faster, you just added a higher horsepower motor. Wahoo went and re-engineered the entire thing. So in their motor, I believe they're up to 15 miles an hour. And then not only that, if you connect it to something like Zwift, there is the ability for the treadmill itself to adjust based on the terrain you're running in the virtual environment. So if you're coming around a curve, the treadmill will actually tilt and rise in parallel with that experience on the road. So you can really recreate it. And another good thing about a lot of these applications, again, with Zwift, is you can also program your workouts and intervals. So on screen, you can see, okay, right here, I need to set the treadmill to 10 miles an hour, and I'm going to do it for 3 minutes, and it's going to tell you when to set it down. It can automatically adjust the incline. What they've done with that particular treadmill in that engineering redesign is one of the things it's always a struggle if you're running especially short intervals is how long does it take for the treadmill to get to speed? How long does it take for the treadmill to drop back? With this particular treadmill, it's almost instantaneous. And they have also implemented something called free run on this particular treadmill, where based on where you are physically on the tread itself, front, middle, or back, it adjusts how fast the treadmill is moving. So if you're staying steady, it's at whatever pace you've set it at. If you want it to go faster, you get up towards the front of it. If you want to slow down, like if you're just finishing an interval, you get towards the back of the treadmill and it automatically slows down. So once you've figured out how to navigate that movement, you're not slamming buttons up and down trying to get your intervals right. And then at the very top end of the treadmill world is Woodway. If you're looking to pass something on to your children, I think Woodways are expected to have 100,000-mile lifetimes, but they're also $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 treadmills. So
like a grand piano.
Yeah, so that's kind of your soup to nuts of an indoor treadmill experience.
Well, I can say I'm one of those that doesn't love to run indoors, never have been. I'd rather be in the cold, in the dark, as long as I had a buddy with me. And Zwift was one of the applications that single-handedly got me through one of those winters. I think we even actually ran together.
We did.
We figured out how to find each other inside the application and then set our treadmills. I think we were on the telephone too, so we could communicate, but set our treads at the same speed, and we were able to actually run the same terrain together. So do you guys know, is Zwift, is that a one? I know I bought a little, like a reader device, but I can't remember if that's a subscription base or not.
The device isn't a subscription base. I think Zwift does have some type of subscription. I know the device you're talking about, it goes on the very back of your treadmill. You can buy it actually off of their website. I think it's made by North Pole.
Okay.
And it just uses infrared sensors to
But it's
measure.
probably one of those $2, $3, $4 a month things. It's
Oh,
not,
yeah, it's not
not
crazy
like
expensive.
Peloton, which is probably more in your $30
And that
to
thing you're
$40
talking
range.
about is less than $100. So you buy a treadmill for $600, you throw that on the back, and all of a sudden you're good. And that's with no Bluetooth capability on your treadmill. And frankly, people are getting rid of treadmills for free all the time.
Yeah.
You can look on any Facebook marketplace, just come pick it up, get it out of my house. I don't care. Mm-hmm. And more often than not, unless it's a walking treadmill, those will suffice. You may need to learn how to adjust the tension of the belt. You may need to lube the belt. But even if you have to replace a belt there, it's only a couple $100. So that's another way to go about finding something. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we talked about the treadmill and some of the things that you would use, or the ways to set those up, or some of the best ones. Talk to us about some of the other applications or some of the other gadgets that you swear by and that either one of you use on a regular basis.
I think the big one we have to talk about, I think we can all talk about this because we've all had experience, is Strava. I would go as far as to say it's probably the most positive social media platform out there, and I think it is absolutely a social media platform. I don't think you can sell it short. I don't think it's half-stepping. Like, there's a lot of people that I know that's their only form of engagement over social media is through Strava. Obviously, and they know who they are. You can tell who they are because they're extremely active on the platform, commenting and kudosing everything, because all of that social energy goes into Strava. But for anybody out there that's looking for a community, that's looking for motivation, however you find it, that's the perfect platform to start. There's so many features and benefits built into Strava. I mean, we could talk for 2 hours on just its benefits, but instead of me going deep into those elements, and it can kind of flow back to me, you've both had a lot of engagement with that platform. I'd love to hear from either of you, your favorite things about it, or even some of the things you don't like about it.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I was on Strava when I first started cycling. I think before I got into it from a running standpoint, but probably one of the most positive platforms there are. I mean, you could join groups. Everyone is, really, I think that's one thing I love about the running community, even at the high school level. It's like everyone wants to just beat their best, right? It's just a very encouraging sport in general. So a lot of the times, you're using it for motivation. And when you see other people's runs, it's even more like, there's, one of our good friends had his PR on the marathon, and it was just like to see them get out there and get after it. It gets you motivated to get out there and get after it. But the ability to like and comment, the ability to add pictures and capture special moments or certain sceneries. I normally don't have my phone with me, but occasionally I'll do. I've used that feature. And then I like the ability to join challenges, right? So they have these monthly challenges that are sponsored by generally pretty large brands. It's like join the Brooks 5K, run a 5K in November, right? And you join all these challenges, and then sometimes you get discount coupons and other things. But it's just done a really good job. And then from the overall, it does a great recap at the end of the year. It keeps all your stats, mileage, vertical feet and things like that. So it's a pretty all-inclusive platform that if you're calling it social media, it doesn't have a lot of the negativity that kind of goes on. It's very positive. It's very encouraging and very, very easy to use, frankly.
Yeah.
And it syncs.
Yeah, it is very easy to use. It syncs. You don't have to upload anything. It just automatically works with watches and things, which maybe we can hit on next. I would say for me, you guys hit on a lot of this. What's cool about it is it's a bunch of like-minded people who have that specific thing. So you don't feel like you're bragging when you post your runs. Just like, again, it's automatically synced and it uploads, where if you were to upload your runs to Facebook or something, everyone would be like, oh, look at you. You think you're better than everybody else, or whatever that happens to be. I think it's just a safe space, honestly, to kind of share what you're doing from a fitness perspective. So I really appreciated that. I mean, you hit on some of the features that I would call out too. I think the challenges are fun, keeps it competitive. We've talked a lot about the competitiveness, and in a sense, you are surrounding yourself with those people in a certain way. You see other people doing things. If you're more competitive, there are things called segments, where it's crowns that you can go out and run this part of the road, try and run it as fast as you possibly can and see how you stack up to others who have run it fast. You could be competing against them. You could be competing against yourself in prior times. So that's a really fun element of the platform. Yeah, I think just overall, it's a positive place to celebrate fitness with like-minded individuals.
Yeah. So, for my input to add a little bit more, I do really like the segment aspect of it. I don't do as much of it anymore, but to kind of drill down on exactly how that works, because it is kind of fun. So imagine you have a neighborhood and you run this circle, right? You have a half-mile loop around your neighborhood and you just run it over and over and over again. And we have a friend in Marion who does this.
Shout out, Cole to read.
Yeah, right. And you want to see if anybody has ever run that part of the road faster than you, provided they have the platform. So you go out and you run your half-mile loop, and then you can go in the app. Once that's complete, you go to that run, and you create a segment, and you create a start and an end point on that loop, and it will go back historically and find anybody who's ever uploaded to Strava who's run that particular part of the road, and you can see how you stack up, which is really cool. And then, of course, once the segment's established, you can then go in the app and browse different segments and be like, oh, I've run that, or I run that area. They've run that fast. Oh, I think I can beat them. And then, of course, like you would, it does segment it by gender, and it segments it by age, and it segments it by weight. So you have those three different things. And then there's also something called local legends, which is cool because it doesn't take speed into it at all. It's just how much you've run a segment over the last 90 days. So that's something that people can compete with and have fun. But you did talk about syncing, and for that to work, of course, with all of these apps, Strava, Map My Run, Runna, there's Nike Plus. You can track your runs using your phone. None of us run with our phones typically because that's our time to kind of get away from the noise and the chaos. And we're experienced enough at this point that, it's not something that we feel necessary to carry. I think females, especially if they run early at morning, late at night, they'll run with their phones at all time. And I completely understand why they would do that. And I think it's a good idea, especially having a 10-year-old daughter and a wife who's going to get back into running soon. But anyways, I think one of the big things there is watches. So that's the other way you can track these runs. If you're not using your phone in your app, you have a watch. And there's a couple of different brands that have made their names in the watch space over the years. Some have started out in the hardware game and faded. So, Garmin has always been a player. Polar was a big player early on. Nike actually played in the hardware space for a little bit, and even Motorola with the Moto Active back in 2011, something to that effect. And then as things have evolved, Nike's gotten out of the hardware game. Motorola only had one device. Garmin has continued to innovate. Polar has stayed in the space, but isn't necessarily dominant. They're probably third or fourth right now. And then you have Suunto, who had a peak 6 or 7 years ago, and I don't think has put as much time and effort into that part of their business. And then Coros has probably moved definitively into the number 2 spot, with Garmin leading the way in terms of wearable devices. Now, we can get real detailed on these devices and what their capabilities are and how you can use them. I don't know, both of you guys have Garmin watches. I don't know if you want to expound on your experiences with them or you want me to dive in, open to whatever.
I think it's important to kind of, I think the watch depends on what you're doing, right? I think we've all talked about that. There are ones that I would probably recommend as entry level, like the 235, the 225. There's certain ones, like for kids, I think there's the 40 or something.
They have a new one out that's specifically for kids. I can't remember. The thing is, though, it uses the Garmin Kids app.
Okay.
So, like, that data, I don't believe transfers. So if you have this kids watch when you're 7, 8, 9, 10, and then you decide to switch to it doesn't mesh.
Doesn't mesh.
Yeah.
So I think, like, when I used to have, I think, a 235, and it did everything I wanted to at the time. And then the 945 came out, the Garmin 945, and that had music. Now I could sync my Spotify playlist, and so I'd have my watch and I have my headphones, which is another one we wanna cover. I had my headphones and I could sync it to my watch, and then I could literally play songs from my watch, which was awesome. And so I used the 945 for a while. That was one of the first features, and then I got into the Phoenix series, which I would say is probably their Cadillac.
Yeah, it is
their flagship model, and that's probably, it does everything from deep diving and aviation and, but it's a $1,000 watch.
Yeah.
Right. So, all the Garmin products are very reliable. I mean, I run with people that have Garmins that are from all different phases and all different ages. And we always end up within half a tenth of each other for the most part, even over a 6, 7, 8 mile stretch. So, they're all pretty good. I think some of the nicer ones maybe catch a little quicker from a GPS standpoint. But depending on whether you want music when you run or podcasts that you want to be able to actually load on your watch, battery life could be something that's important. Again, I think the Phoenix will last a week or more, where some of the other watches will maybe last a couple of days. So battery life, functionality, but really any of the Garmin lineup can, if you just want to record runs and sync to Strava just to kind of track progress, right? Because that's the gamification. It's how am I doing? Am I making incremental progress and so forth and so on? I don't think you can really go wrong.
I think one thing that I forgot to mention a company, and you've had experience here, so I want to take it and twist it. Apple. Obviously, Apple came into the game, started implementing in collaboration with Nike early on. They've since released a couple watches that are a little bit more fitness focused with the Ultra and the Ultra 2. I know you haven't worn the Ultra stuff, but there for a while you experienced both sides of things. So, I think there are positives and negatives to both, and I'd love to hear that assessment from you.
Yeah, I would say, Apple was great. And if you have an Apple Watch, that worked very, very well also. I think, from a precision perspective, and when I say precision, we're talking about 100th, give or take, in a mile, which seems a little bit ridiculous. That's where I found a little more reliability in the Garmin. But for 99% of use cases out there, the Apple is very sufficient. I would say the Apple is as much similarly reliable and as Apple is just in general very good with experience. That's kind of a usually very intuitive experience. Some of the things that I found, there were things that connected with the Apple Watch that I could use that were even a little easier to do than Garmin. Like, for example, intervals. You kind of do more live versus having to like pre-program it into the watch. So, I've gone back to the Garmin since having the Apple Watch on, but I also, I think what's interesting is they both kind of converged over time. For a while, your Garmin watch you only had that available in a very sporty kind of look, and it was more functional based. And I think you had your Apple, which was experience based and had some function with it. I think Apple's done a great job kind of closing the gap on the functionality side, and I think Garmin has actually done a really good job on the fashion and experience side. I think it's the Garmin Venue maybe that's one of their new ones that looks very much like a watch, a nicer watch that you would wear, but has all the same capabilities. So I think Apple is also a real player.
I think one of the big things, talking about wearables in general, that everybody's adopted is measuring your health overall, right? And all of these different bodily metrics. One of the things that Garmin does to differentiate their watches, a lot of these watches, like you've seen with Apple phones, are very incremental from a hardware perspective. They're just changing little things. Like from the Garmin Fenix 7 to the 8, there was a screen change. They went from the traditional MIPS display to an OLED display, but the big change was the heart rate sensor, the optical heart rate sensor that you wear on your wrist. There has been a lot of discussion, especially early on with heart rate sensors. The inaccuracy could be wild. Whether this is years ago, whether it was Apple or Garmin, it has gotten better. I used to wear a heart rate strap exclusively with this particular watch. I haven't over the last couple of months, but one of the main reasons for them wanting to improve the accuracy of the heart rate sensor is they want to measure all of these things. Now, that does require you wear your watch 24/7. With Garmin, that's great. If you're not running every day, you'll get about a week, especially if you're using music here and there. If you're not, you can get a month. Where with Apple, even with the Ultra 2, you might get 2 days. So you're recharging it constantly, but you have to wear this to sleep. Garmin has features like body battery. And I think most of the top end watches have all of that feature set. Like you said, with some of the entry-level Garmin stuff, it's going to track your run. It might allow you to do simplified intervals where they're very fixed. You can do 400 repeats or 1,000-meter repeats, but you can't do like 400. You can't do a ladder, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. They're not necessarily programmable. They don't have music. But anyways, back to it. They want to measure your resting heart rate at night. They want to measure your heart rate variability, which is a measurement of how recovered you are. They want to measure your O2 saturation to make sure that your oxygen levels are at the right level. They want to measure that to be able to deliver you predictions on your readiness for that particular day. How ready are you to take on a particular type of workout? What is the strenuousness level of that particular workout for the day? Does it align with where you are physiologically? And then once you've executed against the workout, taking into account all of these measurements after the workout, how quickly are you recovering? When can you hit the next one? So this is all interwoven into this, like ultimately what will be AI-powered prediction for what you should do to achieve the goals that you kind of input in there.
I imagine for a lot of people that can be very overwhelming.
Sure.
I think those of us who have done it for a long time have our kind of opinions on the importance of a lot of that and or the accuracy of that. So maybe talk that through with some people who might be overwhelmed by all of the things that they're getting.
Yeah, I think that they try to make it as simple as possible. And it's not necessarily, they try to just give you a score. I think what I found is that while these might not be extremely accurate, so example being, if you have a particular HRV, first of all, that is a really interesting metric in and of itself, because your HRV average is way different from your HRV peak, and it just varies so drastically from person to person that you can't necessarily, just because I'm a 45-year-old male that weighs 160 pounds and this guy's a 40, and we're the same level of fitness, our HRVs could be wildly different. So
there's a genetic.
Yeah, and you don't. Yeah, absolutely. And you don't want to go Google and say, "Oh, my HRV is 65," and it's like, "Oh, it should be 118." Just so you know, HRV is a measure of the variability between the beats of your heart. So it's measured in milliseconds, and the more recovered you are, the higher that variability should be.
Isn't it somewhat of explain this a little bit? My understanding is there's a little bit of a measure of that as kind of your reaction time in a sense to is that like, how would
if your body's fatigued, it's not going to be able to appropriately react from a heart pumping perspective.
Yeah.
Right. Your energy's focused on rebuilding the damaged muscle cells or whatever, versus when you are recovered, your body there's going to be a higher rate of variability, again, based on kind of what you're doing. So that's absolutely true.
And the higher the better.
The higher the better.
way that metric works.
The higher the better.
So so the watch now has all that, but you're spending a lot of time talking about recovery. Might be a great pivot. So there's recovery is a big thing now, right?
Huge.
Everyone was all about, let's run, let's get our exercise, and let's do as much as we can. A lot of the newer science, it's about recovery, and there's all these wearables for recovery. So we both have the Oura Ring, which does a lot of the stuff that you just talked about, and you have the Whoop Band. And I actually had the Whoop Band for several years as well. And so these devices are mainly just recovery devices. So either one of you talk about your experience and how important recovery is, and how you've kind of integrated that into the whole cycle of how you take care of yourself.
I think for me, the benefit has become, again, I wouldn't say that anything is perfectly accurate. I don't think I wouldn't rely on anything as medical grade. I think some of these are very close. There's a guy on YouTube who is a scientist who tests the efficacy of these and has actually done a pretty good job at identifying which ones are closer to medical grade versus not. But anyways, for me, I think it's interesting because I think you can unfortunately make it a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, for instance, if you were none the wiser and you had a rough night, you just didn't sleep well, you could probably wake up and get through the day. But if you wake up and you see that your recovery score is 40, that might negatively reinforce your behavior. Be like, oh, I'm tired, my recovery score was 40. Whereas if you didn't know, on the flip side though, I find that it helps me diagnose myself to the best of my ability. So I was having, so for me, when I experience COVID, I get crazy body aches. And I was experiencing something that felt really systemic a couple of weeks ago. Oddly enough, it had kind of crossed over. So I was having some joint pain, and then it got really severe for a couple of days. And I didn't know what it was. Was it my workload? Was I just doing too much? Was I not moving enough and getting good blood flow? Well, my ring, what I noticed was that my resting heart rate was elevated 7 beats a minute, was up that way for like 10 days. Well, if it's that elevated for that long a period of time, my body is obviously fighting something systemic. It's not just a joint flare-up or something like that. So it helps in that regard. And then it does, I think it does, for me, help me to focus on, I want to get that good score, so help me to focus on getting good sleep and waking up refreshed.
Gamification. I love the gamification of it. I'm also a what gets measured gets managed. I enjoy data, as you'll find over the episodes. So it's been wonderful for me. I've been wearing the Whoop Band for probably 4 years now, I would guess, pretty religiously. Just wear it all the time. And there's a little thing you clip on the top to recharge the battery. You don't even have to take it off. I'm really debating going to the Oura Ring because I'm starting to get having both wrists, and I've got a silicone ring anyway to go to something like that. I think what's interesting, TJ, I wanted to point out what you said. not necessarily medical grade, but I think the value of these things are not necessarily, is my HRV 65, but what days is it lower and is it higher, and it's the trend. So as long as there's a consistent baseline and you're measuring whether it's better or worse, a lot of times I'll notice patterns in my behavior in the evenings and what my score is in the morning. So sleep, huge indicator. If you have a drink of alcohol or two, if you eat late at night, another one that's really interesting. So what's cool about it is being able to just observe, and then the depth of your sleep. How much are you getting deep in REM sleep, which is true kind of recovery type sleep, versus light sleep, and those two different things. Light sleep is more for like memory. Deep in REM, if I'm remembering correctly, deep in REM is more kind of true kind of recovery. And I think even within deep in REM, there's different purposes of those. And so there's just a lot of fascinating things in there that I think the awareness for me I've absolutely loved. And again, with a consistent baseline, you can, to the extent that you have interest in doing so, continue to optimize your routines to be at your best. And you've said this in prior episodes, maximize your energy units each day.
I had the Whoop initially, and what I really loved about that was the journaling and the questions. So you can set that particular app up, and it really did help with the patterns, right? It was like, it asked me a question, did I have alcohol tonight? And like for me, sugar. And I mean, you can set it up to ask you any question. So you could be like, did I have sex that night? Like you can figure out what things are driving. And then at the end, you would see, okay, well, here's what my scores were, and here's how I answered these questions. And there was a general kind of catch-all. So for me, wearing the Whoop really helped me identify those patterns. And over time, I kind of know it's like, yeah, if I drink alcohol or I if I have some sugar late at night, of course that's going to impact me. Like we all know that, but to what extent, it was very dramatic. And so I really enjoyed the Whoop. My whole thing for switching is the same thing you talk about. I don't even have my watch on. Like I don't like wearing stuff. And so that was the main reason why I switched. But I think it's important to know we all have a focus on recovery. We're all monitoring recovery. We're all responding to our bodies. Although we have a lot going on, we don't operate in that, let's sleep 4 hours a night and just go. Now, there are nights that happens, but for the most part, we're very dialed in on our recovery.
I think what you both said is important. It also allows you, we talked, I mentioned out of sight, out of mind, right? Had I not known my recovery was 40, maybe I would have operated better. But I think conversely, you can't run away from the bullshit anymore. Meaning that you can't, if you have 4 or 5 drinks in a night, your HRV is going to be through the floor and your heart rate is going to be through the roof. It validates, like, I think at times if you have an issue, and we can do an episode on food, which I think a lot of us have struggled with, I will say I have in a major way, you try to ignore the impact. Because when you're in your teens and your 20s and your 30s, you can kind of eat whatever you want. And not necessarily, you can't necessarily avoid weight gain. My weight's always fluctuated drastically, but you don't necessarily feel the physical impact the next day. If you have 5 or 6 drinks when you're 23, if you've built up a tolerance those first 2, 3, 4 years, 4 drinks is not going to affect a senior in college. Like, that's like, having a light breakfast. Same thing with eating food at midnight and snacking on Cheetos. You're not going to feel that in the morning when you're 27. But I think we try to ignore that as adults. Like you try to block it out. And man, to your point, like if I eat after 6:30 and I go to bed, my heart rate is going to be 4 or 5 beats higher resting because my body's digesting that food. And if your body's digesting that food, what isn't it doing? It's not repairing itself. Right. Same thing with alcohol, but it's multiplied. It's way worse. And it's trying to, process that alcohol through your system instead of doing what it's supposed to do and helping your body recover and get back to that stasis.
I find what's interesting, it's nothing that's like revolutionary that you haven't heard before. I mean, this may be news to some people, but like, yeah, you've heard alcohol is not great for your body or eating late at night. You kind of hear these things, but it makes it so real and so obvious that, to your point, you can't ignore it. It's not like, you can't sweep it under the rug when you see that, like, okay, I'm eating late and my body is not able to get into a deep sleep because it's digesting this food. And it's not recovering. For me, it just changes the accountability.
Mm-hmm. So
I was going to ask about another app, City Strides.
Yeah.
You didn't talk at all about that. That's been something that you've used a lot to gamify and keep things fun. I think you mentioned it maybe in a prior episode, but talk about that a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. I think City Strides is phenomenal, and you both have a lot of extensive experience with City Strides. So this is back in July of 2021, maybe. Buddy of mine, the Unicorn. He's lived in a particular city most of his life, or at least his adult life, Carmel, Indiana. And he would always take me on these unique routes, and we'd just be running random places in Carmel. He has a very unique internal compass. So he always knows where he is, and he can go off and complete random tangents and always end up back where he started. Whereas if I went off on a tangent, I'd end up in a different country. But he's really good at that. And so for a while, I'm like, why don't we just run every street in the city? And we found this app called City Strides. And what it does is it takes GPS data from all of your prior runs. So whatever platform you're on, Strava, Garmin, all the ones I just mentioned, or we just talked about, and it imports it into this application. And then it creates a map for you. And it shows you on the map what you have run and what you haven't run. And then there's also a couple other elements. So there's also a list in that particular city of the streets that you've run and the streets you haven't run. And then what you can do is it has a route creator. So you can bring up your map of completed streets and you can draw a route of the streets that you haven't completed yet. Then you can export that and import it into your watch, and you can go out and run those streets. So, what a phenomenal way to keep things fun and interesting. But both of you have each done a city. You've done 3 or 4, and you've done Westfield. I think I'd love to hear you guys kind of talk through what you loved about those, because you had wildly different experiences in the 2 different cities that you ran.
Yeah, it took me through another winter. Zwift had one winter, this was another winter, and it was great. Like, I would get down and you'd create a 5-6 mile route, and you'd have to do some backtracking, but you got those segments and you just kind of worked your way across the city. It was great. It actually made purpose and it showed progress, and I was excited. I've hit a bunch of small towns. And actually when we did I think we're doing the GA 5K, me and my buddy Beal, we did 2 towns back to back. We had one that was like 15 miles, another was like 13, and we went back to back on those. But it is a phenomenal app. The fact that you can draw your route out, you can export it, you load it into your watch, and then I go to my watch, we get to, we drive to the starting point, I hit start, it recognizes where I'm at, and it says, okay, go, and then it'll say, turn right, and you'll turn right, and then turn left. Like, it literally beeps at you and directs you, and I don't know which watch that you need in order for that to work, but it just makes it a lot of fun. And then you have your, I've done this many cities, and I've done this many roads, and where I'm at, one of the challenges was there was just a lot of dogs. So we had that to kind of deal with, but I got to see some amazing places. I grew up in this town of 25,000, and there were roads I've never been down. And there were like brick roads from 100 years old. Again, that exploration of a place I've been my whole life was really, really cool.
Yeah, wonderful gamification. And I think it's 1,338 streets was, I remember our latest. And what's cool, the Westfield's growing a lot. And so every couple of months you check back in, there's more streets to do. And so you kind of keep up with it. But gosh, we would go out, and I feel like it made the miles go faster, right? It would be, we go out, run 7-8 miles, and it would just, we're thinking, okay, how many streets is it? And it's just a fun thing to occupy your mind. So you're not just going out there and putting one foot in front of the other for 10,000 steps, right? And that's kind of the monotony you're trying to break up. And it just did a fantastic job of doing that.
It is kind of fun in those cities that are growing, because it doesn't always keep up. So there is, and I forget this system, I have to remember, but there's a particular system online where new roads are entered into this government database, and then individuals can go and this is all done. It's a kind of a labor of love through the community that's behind City Strides. They can go and they can make sure these roads populate on the application itself. And even together, I know we took Trent once. Trent was down in Westfield. We're like, oh, let's go hit these roads. And it's
Mud.
a neighborhood that's not even up yet. It's just dirt. So we're
terrible.
running like these, cleared dirt mud pits that will be roads one day. And we have to make decisions. Todd and I at times will show up places and like 70% of it's paved. And it's kind of like, gosh, we're 9 miles in, but we're here. We might as well get these other 4 miles, because are we really going to drive? That is the one that gets to be kind of, after a while, a little bit daunting, is as you get towards the ends of these cities, you're driving like 20, 30 minutes each way to get to your starting point. And we try to keep it authentic or honest. You know, you could go out and park and run a cul-de-sac for a half mile and then stop your run. But the way we do it, you know, it's typically a 5 or 6 mile run, and we're doing backtracking. We want to get a little bit more out of it than that. So really, one of my favorite apps, one of the other ones that we've been using, especially this year, you want to talk about gamification, is Smash Run. I don't think a lot of people use that, but it's a really cool platform. And I don't know, Trent, if you've used that a lot this year for the streak.
Yeah, you got it for me for Christmas one year, and that was probably 3 years ago. So yet another system that imports data from all the other systems. And it, you know, you get badges, and you get badges for running on different continents, and badges for running before the sun's up, and badges for streaks. And it tells you every time you log in, you're on streak 350 days. And so I generally hit that one once a week. It talks about all time. So it's easy for me to see how many miles that I run in 2024, 23, 22. So it's a really easy way to navigate all your data. It has your PRs for all the different distances. But I think the badge system is
super cool.
It's pretty.
Why don't you tell them about your favorite badge on Smash Run? You were talking about it for multiple years, and we finally got that badge.
It was the Solstice. Yes, we finally got the Solstice badge. I've gotten most of the badges on there, and they're really cool. You want to talk about, again, gamification and making it fun? Like, if you go and you gather all these badges, it's pretty wild. But Solstice is really cool. Because you have to start your run before sunrise on the day of summer solstice, and you have to run after sundown, same day. And you also can do winter solstice, which I think is coming up really soon.
Yeah.
Where it's very similar, and you have to run like in those same windows. So Todd and I, last summer,
I got that one. Yeah, the summer one.
Yeah, ran on both sides of it and got the solstice badge. So now I'm going to have to see when winter solstice is coming up. You guys continue your conversation.
So, those are some apps that you can download. I think most of those, I believe City Strides is a $4.99 app, and I think Smash Run is like
you can do it for free, but it's like $60 a year.
Yeah, it's like $60 a year. So, as you can see, there's just, hey, I want to get on a treadmill and I'm just going to run, or I'm going to go out and run. There's a lot of different ways to make things interesting, to just continue to keep things exciting. And we just keep trying to find new ways to do that.
What about headphones?
Oh, yeah.
You guys have, I believe you guys wear the same headphones, a little bit different than what I do, but why don't you talk about that? And then I'd also like to talk before we leave is about shoe technology too. I think that's a different element. But.
So I have the shocks that go over the ear. They have been fantastic. I love them. I've tried a lot of different things. I have little ears, so the ones that go in and turn and you put actually in your ears never have stayed in my entire life. I've had ones that cover the ears. The shocks are just incredible because they sit outside and they use like vibration of the bones, and so you can hear everything around you, but they have really good quality. They have great battery life. I can't say enough good things. And frankly, there's been some races where they're the only type of headphones you can wear, depending on what the race is. I think that was Hood to Coast was that way. So love my shocks.
I would agree. And if you guys remember, I wore the very first pair of shocks for that 100-miler. They were corded back then. Yeah. Yeah. And that was a technology that was when the company was in its infancy. I'm wearing the shocks open air fit now. So they've gone from around the back of the head to the bone conduction, true wireless, to now open air is the newest true wireless technology where it kind of is a speaker sitting over your ear. So it's a little bit different. Those just came out a couple of months ago, and I've been wearing those. But same. They stay where they're supposed to stay. They allow you to hear your external environment. They're plenty loud enough. Watches are changing a little bit. This is a pet peeve of mine. But today we were running, and we had we had a conversation, and we had kind of paused for a little bit. And these newer watches, this one in particular, the new Phoenix, has a speaker on it, so I was able to play music through it. What I do like is that I can do that in a pinch. If I do want to listen to music and don't have my headphones, I also like that it's not loud, because contrary to your opinion, runners, no one wants to hear your music when you're running. So those of you wearing like loud wearable speakers, if you're on a remote trail by yourself or with your buddies and you guys have agreed on the music, totally cool. But please, not on busy trails, blasting as loud as you possibly can. But yeah, I love the Shox open air stuff for sure.
I've worn the Power Beat Pros that are kind of over the ear. They kind of go around. I've had those for a few years now and just worked really well. I haven't had any issues. That the first generation, some battery life issues after a couple of years, which is, I think, pretty common with tech these days. But the most recent ones I've got maybe a year ago have been really solid, very reliable, good quality audio. And I know there's a ton of options out there.
Yeah, I think, the only other real area of tech before we jump into shoes, which could be quite the rabbit hole with the innovation over the last couple of years, there's two other elements that we haven't really talked about it, and I think those relate to the approach to training. So we've talked a lot about time metrics, right? Seconds and minutes and intervals and distance and things like that, and this speed for this duration, or this pace for this duration. That's one way to approach training. There are three other typical methods, right? One is RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion, and it's basically, it comes with practice, but it's kind of knowing where you are based on how you feel. That's something that is really hard it's like perfect pitch. It's really hard to get off the jump, but once you've run for a period of time, you kind of know. The other two ways to measure your running is one, heart rate zones, which is a big thing you hear a lot about now. Zone 2 is back in vogue, and training in that particular zone. So heart rate zones are established a number of different ways, but typically it's your max heart rate. So figuring that out, and then each zone is a percentage of that maximum heart rate. And so heart rate straps are the most efficacious way to measure heart rate. And a lot of the higher end ones, like the Garmin HRM Pro, those also measure other metrics. Most of the metrics aren't going to be utilized by normal people. Vertical oscillation, left-right balance. So which are you favoring a foot? Stride rate. Stride rate can help. They use it. There's an accelerometer in the actual heart rate monitor around the chest strap itself. So that also adds some metrics. So that's one thing. If you're into heart rate training, your coach is into heart rate training, or if you are interested and you want to understand, Trent mentioned it very, very briefly in the first episode as it relates to stride length and cadence. You want to improve your cadence first, and then as you get stronger and as you get faster, you want to take that cadence and lengthen your stride out. But if you don't have something that allows you to measure that cadence accurately, you can't necessarily address that problem. So
talk about just the heart rate training for a second before you jump into the last, which I know you're going to go. There are some benefits to that, right? Because you do find yourself in different environments. You're running maybe different undulations. You're running on different terrains. You're running in different temperatures. Like, talk about the benefits of doing a heart rate based.
Yeah, I mean, it really is keeping yourself honest. And I think it's super beneficial for runners just beginning, even though it seems like it's a little bit more difficult. One of the things that I think, we talked about kind of literally walking before you run and working your way into it slowly. I think our egos push us to exert more effort than we probably should be exerting. And one of the things that I think puts people in a position to fail right away with running is the only type of running they've ever experienced was on the playground when they were in fourth grade. Run as hard as you can because we're playing chase, we're playing hide and seek, and that's just not it. If you go basic, it's really, people still call out the 80-20 rule. and as it relates, if you get nuanced about it, as it relates to that effort of running, that should probably be about 5% of what you do every week. And so what the heart rate training does is it keeps you honest. If you get to a point of fitness where, let's say, an 8-minute mile is zone 4, so we'll call it like a high-end aerobic or tempo work. Well, that's great if you're running on a flat surface. But again, to your point, if you're running up a 7% grade, you're way over your skis if you're running an 8-minute mile. So it helps keep you honest and keep you where you should be, because the goal is that you want to get the most efficient work you can. We've talked a lot about recovery in this episode, right? And you want to get the biggest bang for your buck. If you can get the same aerobic adaptation running at 70% effort that you can running at 90% effort, why would you ever run at 90% effort? It's just an ego thing at that point. Now that's oversimplified, right? You're going to get different adaptations at 90% that you are going to get at 70, but let's say it's a difference between 70 and 73. You're still in the same zone, but it's going to take longer. It just is how it is. And the older you get or the higher level you get, the more intentional you have to be about that, because if you're running 110 miles a week, you have to be very specific with your recovery.
I would say the other thing I would add too is you may not all be, and everyone may not be going for kind of aerobic efficiencies or gains, right? So I know with different zones, your body reacts differently to those different zones. So some people may be more interested in what I think is zone 2 is called the fat burning zone, is that zone 2. So where if you're really trying to burn fat off, that is going to be a better place for you to do incline walking, that sort of thing. And you may never need to get into zone 3, 4, 5, because when you get into some of those upper end zones, your body has to, I think, if and correct me on this, has to start using muscle and other types of things to, keep your body fully fueled for those things. So that could be counterproductive for someone that's trying to build muscle and lose fat. You may want to just hang out in zone 2. So that is another thing I would add about why you might do the heart rate training, if that's. No,
that's absolutely, it's really accurate. I mean, if you look at bodybuilders and you go look at a bodybuilder doing cardio, it's always incline walking, because they don't want to burn that muscle. Obviously, the higher you get into the heart rate zones, your body's scrambling to find anything it can to use for fuel. It doesn't have the cycles to break down fat and use it for fuel when you're running, full-blown VO2 stuff or high-end anaerobic. It's just trying to stay afloat. So yeah, that's super spot on.
And you were going to go into, I think,
and the final one, this is again kind of a nuanced thing. It's kind of new, but as a cyclist, which I'm not, but most cyclists out there, their main metric is power. And so they use power meters on their bikes to determine, it plays very heavily into their training, different levels of power. Well, Stride is an organization that I think came out with the first Stride back in 2016 or 2017. I remember I took the first version when I went to Boston in 2017. They had their booth at the Boston Expo for the first time, and I just purchased their product and had some conversations with them. But Stride is another piece of technology that's continued to get more and more accurate. You're seeing a lot of the professionals using it, and really what it does is it's depending on the way you're looking at it, maybe even a more accurate representation of effort than heart rate. Again, there's a lot of nuance to that because your heart rate can be affected by other things. Stride is a number, or Stride's power number takes into account if you're running into the wind, takes into account if you're running up hills, a number of different things. So it's another different way to measure your output. A lot of people are starting to develop training programs where they're using running power. Garmin has added that functionality to their watches, but it's not necessarily as accurate.
What is it? Is it like a pod you put on your shoe?
It's a little shoe pod. They've recently introduced, I think last year they introduced Stride Duo. So you wear one on either foot and it actually measures your foot strike patterns. So if you're having issues, imbalance issues, or our friend Corey, and Corey is about, as deep as you can get into running culture and training culture and all of these other things. Corey got the Stride Duo. He was having imbalance issues and he was able to share that data with a physical therapist. And they were like, oh my God, like his imbalance was insane. I mean, if you guys look at your running balances, is normally 49 and 51 or 49 and a half and 50 and a half. His was like 37 and 63 or just like something completely out of control. But there ended up being some credence to that. And so he found out through the use of that technology that he had some things that he needed to work through. So that's another, I guess, probably, without getting into things that are, more gear related, like we can talk about these at some other time, but the types of headlamps or the types of clothing, we could spend probably an entire another episode on how to dress appropriately for 10 degrees and 30 degrees and 50 degrees and 70 or whatever. But I think from a like hardcore technology perspective, I think we've covered a lot of it.
Yep. I believe Peloton tracks output, and I'm not sure if it's the exact same output as I'd be interested in comparing that, but there's an output there that they track as well. I was going to ask you about one other, and I know this is probably more relevant for the elite level who are interested in training, but the lactate stuff, like just maybe briefly cover the fact that some might be interested that some actually do this and use this.
Sure.
Yeah. Because that's another.
I think this for me is like the ultimate in gamification. And I say that because no matter what method you use, you don't know for sure whether or not you're where you're supposed to be when you're training. And everybody, at the end of the day, 99% of people are going to be over their skis in some regard. They're going to be training a little harder than they should. Everybody wants to go out and run an effort and call it a tempo when it was nowhere near a tempo, right? Or there's a guy, I think he goes by Jack Harrell on Instagram, and he's hilarious because he pokes fun at this. He'll be like, zone 1 effort, 21 miles at 430 pace, heart rate 115, just being completely facetious and kind of poking fun at the people that want to call. And it's funny because I think if there's one element of running culture that people really get into, it's like, there's no way that was a tempo run, or there's no way that guy did that at that effort or whatever. For some reason, that really strikes people viscerally and they react. But to get back to the lactate piece of the puzzle. So what it is, there's a meter that you can buy, and this has been around for years, but really popularized. I mentioned Jakob Ingebrigtsen earlier. The Norwegian training method right now is gaining a lot of traction because it allows you to pack a bunch of quality work into a condensed period of time. And again, to the point I made earlier, the only way you can do that is to ensure that you're exactly where you need to be from an effort perspective. So what this is a meter, and you have strips that come along with it, and you prick your finger like you would to do a blood glucose test, and you measure the lactate level in millimoles of your blood on this machine. So you can see specifically where you need to be. So I'll give an example of this in real world application.
How about I give the example when I showed up to a run with you guys? So if you haven't figured out, they're a little more intense than I am. Like the way I would describe running is you go out and you run, 60, 70% of the time you just run easy so you can work on distance, and then you run hard, you do intervals the other side of the time. They're like, hey, we got this new thing. We're going to do this lactate threshold. Let's meet out at the track. And I'm like, oh, this sounds good. And I'm like, so I meet my brothers out and we get out there, and they get a table out. They line all this stuff up, and I'm like, it looks like a pharmacy. And like, okay, we're gonna run a couple laps, and then you're gonna come around, you're gonna prick your finger, and you're gonna check your blood, and then this is gonna tell you what you need, and this will tell you whether you need to, slow down or speed up. And so then you prick it, and then, based off of that, you would run the next lap, kind of knowing where you're at until you hit and you would do that every couple of laps until you knew you were in the segment. But we have all those blood things in the trash can. I mean, it was quite the experience, but it was really interesting to kind of figure out where that zone was.
The gamification of it, and this is like the example. So I'm coming back kind of off of a break with some injuries that I was dealing with, and I don't really know where I'm at from a physical fitness perspective. And so the number for kind of an aerobic threshold in millimoles for lactate is, let's call it 2. The number's 2. So I would do a particular interval. I would test my blood, and if I'm around 2, that means I'm where I should be. 2. What?
I was going to try and explain this a little bit. So
Sure.
there's when you're talking about the certain levels, and help me explain this, but basically there's a certain point where your body struggles to clear the lactic acid from your bloodstream. The lactic acid builds up, and that's where the numbers go up, and that's where you're kind of a ticking time bomb. If the lactic acid is building up, you are basically on your way to
long recovery.
Funky town.
Yes, and there's going to be a point in time where you're not going to be able to continue. So these numbers are measuring at what speed, at what level, and again, given all the conditions, is that lactic acid starting to build up versus your body's able to continually clear it. So I just wanted to set that foundation.
No, I think that's thank you for articulating it that way. So like, it's so cool. You get on a treadmill. And for me, it was, I'm going to run 12-minute long intervals, and I'm going to run them, I think it was at 6:20 pace. And I want to be at 2, because 2 is for me what I can hold for a marathon. What most people can hold for a marathon that are well trained. So I ran it. I pricked my finger. It was 2.1 after my first interval. After my third interval, it was 1.7. So I know I can go out next time, and instead of 9.5, I can try 9.6. And then I can go measure again. And if I'm still at 2, then the next week I can try 9.7. If I'm not, then I need to do a couple weeks of 9.6. And so it's this really cool way from a statistical perspective to see your progress. Yeah. Wow, my body is getting more efficient at performing this process. And I'm seeing actual real especially in a controlled environment like the treadmill, real representation of progress. And that's one of the very few ways with running outside of having a good day. Because even when you complete a hard workout, you don't know how much you had to put in to complete that hard workout. You can't quantify it. Yeah, I finished it, but I may, be way deeper in the well than I think I am. So that's something that I really like about that, and something I'm really looking forward to coming back over these next couple of weeks.
Yeah, interesting. Should we close with shoes?
Let's get it.
We might as well do gear too, shoes and gear. I mean, I
guess we're here.
Yeah. Well, let's hit shoes. I mean, I think just the obvious thing here, and I think most people have maybe heard this, but it was maybe 5 years ago now when
right around BQ2. When was that?
2017.
Yeah, it would have been 17.
Because we ran 18.
They
4%ers.
Yeah, the 4%ers, which Nike came out with this premise, that our hypothesis that you would basically, if you wore these shoes, you would be 4% more efficient. And so there was a carbon fiber plate that was inserted into the shoe that essentially propelled your foot forward in a sense, that helped you. So, that motion you weren't having to fully do manually, but you had a little help. And so obviously since then, there's been all kinds of enhancements and different evolutions or versions of that technology. But TJ, why don't you share, and then Trent, you chime in, because we've all worn them, and it would just be interesting to get everybody's opinion.
You can go first, because I can wax on this forever.
Yeah. So I started my running journey in Adidas. I was wearing they're kind Ultra Boost. Yeah, these are more like what you would see people wear, just not to run it. I mean, they're probably a pound each. They're very heavy
casual
shoes. Yeah, they're kind of casual lifestyle shoes. That's where I started, and then over the years I've worn. I think it's important to note. Probably the most important thing is to find a running store where they can have some type of measurement, some type of footprint. I know there's some people in the Indy area, the athletic.
Shout out Athletic Annex.
Yep, Luke and those guys, and
Jake.
And so they've got a great place, but going somewhere where they can actually do some testing, right? To kind of figure out, is your foot wide? Is your arch high? There's all different types there's several different brands that we could arguably, like, you've run in more shoes than all of us. But I've tried Saucony. I've tried,
New Balance,
Hoka, Ons. And for me, I did see some pickup. So going back to your question, the 4%ers make a pretty significant difference there. They are a race shoe that you don't get a lot of miles out of them, but they are super light and they're super bouncy, and they definitely make a difference. But I've kind of settled into like a little bit of a harder shoe, and I seem to always be going back to the Boston 12s. Those have been kind of my staple, but I also think it's good, and you taught me this, is to just rotate other shoes in. So I do have 2 or 3 different pairs of shoes that I'm wearing. You can get 300 to 400 miles out of a pair of shoes, which, if you have a cycle of 3, you're running, I don't know, I'm probably doing 120, 130 miles a month. So I can get a couple months out of all those. But I think it's important to note that there's not like, here's the best shoe, go buy this shoe. A lot of it just depends on the makeup.
Well, and the landscape's changed a lot in the last 5 years too. So brands have caught up. That's one thing I don't know that we mentioned about Strava, is with Strava, you can track the mileage you're putting on your shoes, which virtually, unless you're keeping a spreadsheet somewhere, is extremely difficult. But when you go on a run, you can have those shoes that you basically put into Strava, and then you can select which shoe you ran with. So even if you're running with one pair of shoes, it's nice. I mean, it's hard to know exactly unless you're keeping track of dates or whatever. Certainly when you get multiple pairs, it's nice to know when you're hitting that 250, 300, 350 mile mark, and because it can compound injuries if you're running in shoes that don't have enough miles left.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't, and in that, I track mine on Garmin. It has the same functionality.
Okay.
I would not, I know people at a time took that kind of as a badge of honor. How many miles could they get out of their shoes? Now, there are some shoes out there like Mountain Coast that are designed specifically to last for 600, 700, 800 miles. And they actually advertise that. But I was running with a buddy the other day, and he made the comment, he had gotten a new pair of Asics Nova Blast, and he's like, man, the difference between putting on a pair that's fresh and a pair that's got 350 miles on it is night and day. And what they'll tell you is that those shoes only compress a couple of millimeters, but it does make a pretty massive difference. And the longer you've run, your body will tell you. You'll get these different pains and different things that you weren't getting before when your shoes get to that point. Another innovation that came along with the carbon plate was obviously Pebax and these different foams, and they're continuing to innovate in the foam space. Nitrogen-infused EVA is something that people are exploring right now, different stack heights. What happened was because the shoes themselves were essentially, you would show up to a major marathon after Nike released the 4%ers, and then after Vaporflies came out and Alphaflies came out, you showed up to a major marathon and everybody in the first 1,000 people in the corral had these shoes on. And there was a heavy discussion around whether or not it was technological doping. And so there were restrictions put in place on the stack height of shoes. You can't be over 41 millimeters, I think. You can only have a single carbon fiber plate. You can't have multiple. Now, there are companies out there that have continued to release shoes that are illegal. But in reality, if you're not winning prize money or breaking world records or Olympic records, you can kind of run in whatever you want. From a brand's perspective, the landscape has changed drastically. There are probably 3 or 4 brands right now that are really, I think, Hoka really made a comeback this year. They were really big, obviously, early on in the ultra scene back in the early 2010s. Then they kind of had their lull where they were seen as the senior citizen walking shoe there for a while. But they really came back this year with some great performance shoes. Saucony has continued to do really well with their Endorphin line. Adidas has had a lot of success from an elite marathon perspective with their Adios Pro 3s. The Pro Evo 1 is kind of the pinnacle of ridiculousness for a shoe. So this is taking the concepts that we were talking about earlier. It's a shoe that has no sock liner, that has a painted on sole, that costs $500, and that is supposed to last for 30 miles. So you get a warm up and a race out of them. However, they have won a number of marathons, and at one point had world records, at least on the female side. I don't know if they still do, but they're still winning a ton of marathons. Nike still has a couple of good shoes out there, and then New Balance has released some great top of the line trainers. But I think the number one racing shoe right now in my mind is probably the Metaspeed Sky and the Metaspeed Edge from Asics. Those are probably the 2 most utilized, at least in the US.
So when you say that, you mean, and obviously Nike, who's kind of started some of they call them super shoes, right? You're saying these Asics have caught up to, and potentially, clearly the Adidas, you said Evo.
The Evos, but the Adios Pro 3s, the elites are still wearing those.
Okay, but for like the common, the ASICs have caught up from an efficiency perspective and are every bit as effective as the
Yeah, I would say that
Nexter.
they're right there. I mean, you're seeing some of the best people in the world wear them. Unfortunately, when you get to that level, the difference in these shoes is probably 0.5%, and some of these individuals are,
Sponsorships and things come into play. I would
I mean,
imagine.
ASICS does not have a lot of East African sponsorships, and that's just an entirely different level of.
So for the everyday Joe or Jill, it's really more about comfort and kind of exploring and being willing to try different shoes. And if they're not, if you're not trying to get out there and you're really a competitive racer, it's really just about finding the right place.
Find the right place, man. I mean, that's the most important thing. People that really care about you, because there's so many gimmicks, right? Like the shoes you're wearing, On would try to sell you that those were running shoes at one point in time. They are not. That technology, if you hear the founder of the brand explain it, is hilarious. Makes no sense at all. Now, On has gone a different way. They've made great lifestyle shoes like that. And they've actually changed. If you look at their top end racers, they don't look anything like that anymore because they've realized that it doesn't work. So really go in and talk to somebody. Don't trust. There are some reviewers on the internet, but I would definitely start with somebody at a local running store. Ask your local runners, get referred to your local running store, start there. And then once you've established your own baseline, then start to explore the different reviewers and things online, but don't just go out there and because it's not all created equal, for sure.
So why don't we finish with your favorite running gear, whether that's a shirt or a jacket or tights, something that if you had to pick one or two things or like a perfect outfit you couldn't live without, what would that be? Just go right around.
Gosh, a perfect outfit. Well, I'm going to steal this from you guys because I know we all wear these because I hate the cold so much. I think I've got it on right now.
Brighton.
The Tracksmith Brighton.
Base layer.
Tracksmith, they've got this like little red ribbon thing on the back. Tracksmith base layer is really incredible at not only keeping you warm, but also if you maybe are overdressed a little bit, it's got a way of almost cooling you down too. It's phenomenal. From a gloves perspective, I think I've got Solomon gloves. I've got Raynaud's syndrome, where my circulation, my fingers, my hands are cold all the time, and so I'm that guy out there, and it's 50 degrees, and I've got gloves on because my hands are always cold. So the Solomon gloves have been great. I'm a big mittens fan. I find when I'm in gloves that doesn't work for me. So I'm big on mittens. I'll leave it at that.
On your shorts, underwear or liners?
Underwear. Yeah, big.
100%.
Big Under Armour boxer jocks and then shorts on top of that all day.
T?
It's funny because in the running community, Tracksmith can be looked at as kind of cliche because it's expensive. And it's that brand that associates with runners that are kind of right on the cusp of elite. And so there was a period of time where Tracksmith was looked at as like this brand that people who, the guy, you guys will remember this, the guy that showed up to our cruise run in what we call full gear. And there are memes like this all over the internet where the guy shows up to the Turkey Trot 5K in his Boston jacket and has his Iron Man tattoo on his calf. And, and so I think there were certain people that looked at Tracksmith like that a little bit, like, they were trying hard. But I will say this, and luckily Trent has made this a Christmas gift a couple times over the last couple of years, but that Brighton base layer, you're absolutely right. And people hate it because every time I run in the winter, I talk about how good it is.
It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. I really like their tights. They're one of the few pairs of tights that do have the briefs built in. So they're like a corduroy type, not material, but pattern. And so for me, I'm that guy. I show up to winter runs in my Tracksmith tights with my Tracksmith base layer. I have 2 Tracksmith second layers. So what you'll find is, I think this is important to call out for running in the winter, is that it's layering.
It's all layers.
It's not wearing this heavy North Face jacket. It's all layers. So 1 or 2 of my Tracksmith top layers. I have Tracksmith mittens that I wear over gloves if it's really cold out. And then I'm an Injinji socks guy, which are the toe socks. I love those. So that's typically, my ultimate outfit for running in the winter. And then, summer half tights in a tank or just shirtless. But
I put a quick vote in on the Injinji socks as well. Just from a blister perspective, when I've got the Injinji toe socks on, my blisters are down considerably.
And you are a liner or underwear guy?
I'm a liner guy.
The joke is with TJ, like, if you can't see what religion he is by his shorts, they're so short. I mean, it's all out there.
That's right.
They are tight. There's no doubt about that.
2-inch inseams.
Yeah, that's
1
right.
inch.
Got to have the slit all the way up the side. It's good stuff. Yeah, so there's about 3 years ago, I think I bought all Tracksmith entire catalog, and I have every piece that they probably ever made, and we've shared in all of that, the gloves, the hats, the base layers. I have the pants, the tights, and the shorts. And it was really weird because I remember the exact time that TJ's like, you need to switch to liners, and moving from underwear to liner was very, very odd for me, but I wouldn't go back. I've enjoyed the liners, but I haven't had to buy. So one thing is the quality of it. There's some wool in it. So if you're allergic to wool, it's not a good fit. I bought my daughter one, and she wore it to a game and came, and she was all red all over. But the quality, I haven't bought anything from Tracksmith in probably 2.5 years. And I did make this big old purchase, but I've been able to maintain. I've washed them dozens of times, and so the quality's there. It's like sometimes you get what you pay for. I know there's a lot of other good brands that have a lot of other good stuff out there, but definitely a high quality, good product.
One other thing I'll mention on the gear front that's important for this time of year because it's dark so often is Ultra Aspire waist lamps. So if you're running in the dark, you can buy different headlamps on Amazon that are pretty good, but investing in a waist light from Ultra Aspire, it's expensive, but you guys have run with me with those. It lights up an entire road. They can last for hours and hours and hours on end. They make very good gear when it comes to longer events. So whether that's vests, waist packs, things like that, that's a brand that I'd throw out there that makes really good gear in that regard. So I think that closes it out for me.
Awesome. Good. Well, thank you guys for listening in. Hopefully you learned about some really cool things. There's a lot of stuff that people have developed out there. There's just a lot of creative people. There's a lot of ways to gamify running, exercise in general. And so just encourage you to look into some of this stuff. We'll put a lot of the links that we talked about and some of those things within the post, and you'll be able to get some of that gear and check it out. We'll see you next time.